Hi there, my name is Michael Buffkin. We'll be starting our Tinkercad tutorial lesson series today. This is the first lesson, and really just the idea is to give you a basic overview of Tinkercad, really pieces, parts, getting used to the software, and really just with the idea of you being able to start your journey and creating whatever you'd like. So the first thing that we see here is we see our workspace. The blue grid is the work plane, and I like to think of this as a piece of paper. Most people have seen grid paper before. That's really all this is. It is a opportunity and space in your computer to build the world around you. Over here, you will see the boxes and other shapes that we'll be looking at later. Over here, depending on your situation, typically I like to let my students have a mouse with a center mouse button. The wheel lets you scroll in. The center button allows you to pan around without rotating. If you don't have one of those, a trackpad will work. But this box allows you to get certain views that if you're having difficulty with just on your trackpad, it's always good to remember that that's there. So anyway, moving on, this is your brings you back to center. This will, actually not even sure what this button does here, fit all of you. Okay, so if you've got a box here and box here, something over here, then if you just click this, then it brings you to it. Another way is you can hit 6 on your number pad and that brings you right to it as well. But we'll talk about hotkeys later. Moving on, there's the zoom in, zoom out. And then finally, there is the switch to flat view, orthographic view. And what this is for is if you've got a particular model that you're working off of, a circuit board or something that you're building in that space, then you'll be able to have a different view without warping it due to perspective. And that has to do with camera angles. We really won't have need that for a while. Let's see, work plane, ruler, notes. Notes are really helpful when leaving tips for people. And over here are our items. And see, the great thing about Tinkercad and most all 3D design is really you're just taking simple shapes and increasing them to make larger ones, right? And so what we want to do is be familiar with the workspace and be able to kind of put things together and kind of how they're going to flow. So let's see. The first thing that we'll do is we'll bring out a box, okay? And I'll center it up here. Let me zoom in. Tinkercad is an internet-based browser version of CAD software, and so it's meant for design. This is very bare bones in the sense of it doesn't give you too many options, but there are some great artists and creators out there that are able to put some things together in order for really just make some amazing things. Some amazing skills is done with something that's simple. But for us, what we want to work on today is we want to understand how Tinkercad views things, right? And so when you're working in 3D, you really want to build a space in your head that visualizes the piece outside of the computer. And what I mean by that is, so if I say pan to the right, that means move over to this way, pan to the left, look at this side of the box. And you'll see the corresponding words up here in my box as they rotate as well. Again, if you ever get lost, you can always just hit home. The way that we're going to look at this box comes out of the gate looking 20 by 20 by 20, okay? It'll always be that size. Right? And one thing that you want to do in 3D modeling is you want to work as close to scale as possible, right? So if we're building a building, right? Obviously, we're working in millimeters right down here, but you can edit the grid to be inches, bricks. My point being is if we're building a building and we know we want to make a 3-story tall building, then we will make it 30 because we'll just use millimeters as feet. It's in other softwares, it allows you to do this, but since this is Tinkercad, really just getting proportional scale is the more important thing and knowing how it's working. And the reason I put 30 is because the average building height is 10 feet per story. So what do all these dots mean and how do they affect the box? What we're going to look at here is the box has a white dot at the top, which dictates height. You can see that you get a marker here that tells me how tall it is. And no matter what number you type in, if you type in 1,000, it'll go there until it reaches its limit. And then on the sides here, it's really good practice just to click the corner. It gives you both sides. So I have 28 by 20, and that's because I messed with this. If you want to change the size, you have two options. You can manipulate the box by pulling it, or you can type in the number here. And I usually like typing in, especially if you kind of know the dimensions of what you're working with before. The next thing you'd want to do is raise and lower, which is right here. And you'll see that it does two things. It gives me the height I've raised and the total height that it is from the work plane. So let's say I click away and come back, and I want to raise it 10 more. You'll see that my top one goes 10, but now I am 21 above the space here. Okay, and that's a good thing to know, because one, of how high you are, and two, how far you've risen, just so you can kind of play with items. If you want to bring back to the work planes, you just hit D on the keyboard. It'll drop it back down, make it flush. It'll do this regardless of rotation. And we'll talk about rotation now. There are 3 axes, X, Y, and Z, that you can work off of. Those items are here. Anytime I click a rotational item, you'll see that I can make very precise items, or I can say chunky. To stay chunky on the movements, you just keep it below the center blue line. And if you want to be very precise and move it just 6 degrees, 11 degrees, you stay out. And that gives you the items. You can also just type it. So if you want to go 45 and get a perfectly altered one, just do it that way and hit D. And as you, like I said, no matter what, it'll always lay it as flat as it can. Okay. That is the basics on how to move things. A thing with rotation, though, know that once you've rotated it, your warping will stay with the rotation. And so I moved it 45, and now if I want to move it back 45, my box won't, that's not right. My box won't sit flat, right? Because I've warped it. It just no longer does it. So occasionally you can kind of get in the weeds on these things. I won't get too deep. There'll be some examples later lessons where our axis rotation gets off, but we don't have to worry about that right now. Then we're just getting through the basics. So if I wanted to bring out a second box, okay, and I want to place this box perfectly on top of this box, there's a couple ways to do it. One way to do it is by getting the exact height, which is 20. I come over to my item, I raise it by 20, and then I can just drop it here, right? And now, as you can see, that my box is directly on top and I have no clipping. Clipping is when 2 items are coming into each other. You'll see that right here. This item is going inside of this one. It's fine right now. It doesn't matter for anything. It'll only matter for cuts later. But just know when 2 items are, when you don't mean for an item to come through, it's typically called clipping. I'll give you an example of that here. Like, let's say we have this item here. I wanted to bring this down just a little bit to make kind of a shape. This right here, unless you intended this would be clipping outside of the box. The second way that we can get this directly on top is by moving the work plane. Okay. Now, work plane is the blue area here, but if we hit W on the keypad, we have this little orange box that pops up. And this box will place directly on top of whatever your arrow's on. So if I click here, you'll see that my work plane has shifted, and now my new area of work is on top of my box. So if I use my trick that I just learned by hitting D, it drops me to my work plane, and now my box sits directly on top. The way that we're going to get out of this is hit W again, click anywhere that's not on a shape, and it gives you this item here. Okay, and so that's just a really brief tutorial of kind of Tinkercad and the basic, kind of moving items. The only other thing that you really need to see is up here. These items can change. They give you the ability to kind of bevel your edge a little bit. When you bevel an edge, the amount of steps that are taken is the amount of computing process. The amount of vertices that are created on the item. Really, it's more of like a Blender 3D modeling kind of situation where you would use these vertices. We won't look at these too much. It only comes in every now and again. But just for your understanding, in computing and in 3D modeling, curves are expensive. Okay, so if we look at this box right here, if I bring it back to baseline, I only have 6 sides to this box. Okay, and I have a really nice computer. I'm able to do some things on this that are pretty fun. And the great thing about Tinkercad, it could run on a Raspberry Pi. It doesn't take a lot of computing processing. But if you start jamming it out with a lot of vertices, you can see here that I've increased this by a lot. And if I keep cranking up these sides and I keep like making it so that it is as detailed as possible, I get a much smoother shape. But if I really start jamming this down, it can kind of slow down your computer. So if you find it that you've, for some reason, got a really heavy file, this could be the reason that you have a lot of vertices on here and your computer's kind of struggling, especially if you're moving it around. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. We want to keep these early lessons easy so that everyone's computer is nice and light and able to do this. The last thing I wanted to do is we're just going to make a geometric design because there are some buttons up here that I want you to see before we close out. Tinkercad allows you to duplicate items relatively easy, just like you would normally do anything else. You hit Control C, Control V, and I get a copy of my item, right? Not a big deal, right? Everybody who's ever used a Word program should know that pretty well. The cool thing about it is that if I wanted to make just a little bit something a little different, I have a tool that lets me duplicate the same item over and over. For example, if I wanted to make, if anyone's ever been to like a dinner party or gone to a wedding where the napkins are stacked on top of each other and make that really cool spin item, we're going to do that here. We're going to make a napkin stack. And that'll be your first item that we make in Tinkercad. And so I'll hit D to drop this to the pad. You'll see that I have a flattened box. The dimensions don't matter too much. You just want to equal 49, 49. It can be 20, 20. It doesn't matter. The height, you just want to keep this reasonable. I've kept it to 1. And so what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate and rotate. So I'm going to click on the item to duplicate it. You'll see that nothing changed. It's not like copy and paste. It makes an exact item copy on top of. And the reason it does is computer is now asking, hey, what do you want to do now? And I want to raise it by 1. And I want to rotate it by 5 degrees, okay? And so you can see now, if I look up directly from the top, I've got a nice little offset. And if we look from the side, I've got just on top of each other, okay? And so now the important thing is you have to do this back to back. If you click off or anywhere, you lose the rhythm of the computer, the memory that's stored. But if you haven't clicked anywhere, if you've still just done your 2 items, click duplicate, and you'll see that it's done that exact thing. It's raised it by 1 and rotated by 5. Raise by 1, rotate by 5. Raise 1 and rotate by 5. Okay? And this is just kind of an example that if you were to do this by hand, it would be a really tedious process that takes a lot of time. But because we are able to use those simple geographic commands, we're able to make kind of a cool little shape here. And that's cool. And this is something, if you got a 3D printer, it might be fun to print. I would just do a little infill, nothing crazy. The last thing I'll show you is how to shrink things down together. So what we'll do here is we will group, and grouping is up here at the top. So I will group these items together. The reason that you see these red lines is Tinkercad has to process everything to make it one. So the more complex an item, the greater load time it'll be. So just know that if you've got those red lines, again, I've got a pretty quick computer, so it's able just to kind of zip this all in. But if you're working on something and I'm still talking, it's still waiting, that's fine. That's completely normal. We're just giving it a second to come in for everybody. Now, back to our friends with the white squares and the dark squares. If I just wanted to make this skinnier, I could, right? And I get kind of a double helix shape here. It's fun, but it's like a drill bit. But I want to make this thing smaller altogether. If I hold Shift and click on the edge and bring it in, now this allows me to shrink everything to scale, okay? And so now I have a smaller item, okay? And you can do all kinds of things now, like manipulate it. And now you can make a drill bit that's thinner. You can just play with it. So again, just kind of a basic item, really just fun. I look forward to kind of getting through this class with you and open suggestions for anything you want to build. I hope you guys have a great time, and I'll see you soon. Hey team, appreciate you being here for the first lesson. Really hope it was a lot of fun for you. This is the part of the video where I ask you to like and subscribe. Looking forward to making some more videos. Again, if you could ever think anything you want to do as a bonus lesson as we work through, I'd love to have your input. Please hit down below, and hopefully see you guys soon. Thank you so much. Have a great day.